To try to help us sift through this, pleased to welcome back to the program John Best, who is the founder and publisher of the Bay Observer. John, good to have you on the program. I hope you're doing well these days.
Doing fine, Bill. Nice to be with you.
Well, it's a busy day today, and it's always tough when you get into the analysis of a budget situation like this, because there's so many different people that have a vested interest in this. The opposition party, well, the one anyway, the Conservative Party, are very much against that. No shock there. The NDP said there's a lot of stuff in there that they like, but they're going to support this, notwithstanding some of the concerns that they have. How would you rate what Minister Freeland presented yesterday?
Well, I'm a newsman. I'm not really an economist, but the thing that jumped off the page to me, quite frankly, was seeing that deficit. I never thought we'd reach a point where we're saying, "Wow, it's only $114 billion," but compared to the deficit that we ran in that terrible year of the pandemic, it certainly looks good to see the deficit moving back. And more importantly, by 2027, it's almost wiped out. So if they stick to that, and there's a lot going to happen between now and then, including an election. But certainly seeing the deficit moving down amid all the spending that they have announced, I think is a pretty good balancing act. And I talked to some people that were in Ottawa. And they suggested that Chrystia Freeland, given her own head on these things, would tend to be a sensible finance minister, and we're seeing some evidence of that.
Well, and some of the stuff that the NDP threw at the table, which actually were things that the Liberals have been talking about and really haven't implemented. One was the dental care program and extended pharmacare, and of course, everybody now wants to use affordable housing as one of their planks. But you're right, it would have cost God knows how much money to say, okay, we're going to do all this stuff. But they also announced, of course, some funding sources, some revenue sources, and that's the tax that they're instilling on, well, the financial institutions, essentially. There's been a lot of pushback on that as to whether or not it's an effective tool. But they actually, the folks at the bank need to understand, I guess this is actually not as severe as they thought. I think the Liberals were talking about a 25% surtax, and it's down to 15 now.
It's going to bring in $4 billion in a $400 billion budget, so it's 1%. They'll learn to live with it, I think.
Yeah, and it's on it's almost like the first 100 million is tax-free, so it's on the excess of 100 million, which is not really going to. Nobody's going to be closing their doors now and say we just can't operate anymore.
No, it's a beginning, I suppose, but it's certainly not. First of all, it's only about half of what they were promising during the election, in terms of the amount of money that it will raise. And, secondly, it represents such a small portion of the total budget that it's a gesture, frankly, but it's, I think people want to see people that are, getting these huge profits, paying some element of a share of it. So it's a start. It's kind of, you look at, all these budgets, when you look at them, it's just sprinkling a little here, a little there. On the defense side, they've hardly, even with what's going on in the Ukraine, and I think people expected we were going to see a massive hike in the defense spending, but we end up with something that's pretty modest. So it's, I think these budgets are getting tougher to do all the time. I laughed, though, listening to the radio this morning, the media trying to make some kind of suspense out of whether or not Jagmeet Singh was going to support the budget or not. That seemed kind of ridiculous to suggest that there was even an iota of a question of whether he'd support the budget.
Well, when I had him on the program a week or so ago, and we were talking, I asked him specifically about the finance for the military. And he said, no, I'm not against it. He says, I just don't think we should be, gaming for the 2%. He says, that's an arbitrary number. But it is a commitment that the Canadian government had made. and they kind of couched the announcement, didn't they? They said a lot of it's going to be on equipment and upgrading existing equipment and improving NORAD, which is really not a bad idea given what's going on in the Arctic these days, and the fact that the Russians seem to be in the takeover mode these days. And we need to do that. But you're right; they're nowhere near the 2% right now. As a matter of fact, even the 1.5 is not going to happen next year. That's going to be over a period of years. So it's going to be slow growth, and I probably think they're going to take some heat for that.
Well, we'll have to see how long the Ukraine crisis lasts, but certainly we're experiencing all kinds of pain right now, including inflation that is really starting to ramp up, especially in areas like food. I was talking to people yesterday who had been grocery shopping and just in the last day or two talking about huge increases in products. It's, they say food has gone up 13%, but it seems like it's gone up a lot more than that for specific items. But, I don't think you're going to see Canada reaching 2% of its GDP on defense. We're nowhere near it, and we're not even, sort of on that trajectory from what I can see. I think, I suppose the good news, 2% of our GDP is a heck of a lot different than 2% of, a country that's not doing as well as Canada financially. So, there still could be significant increases even though we don't hit the 2%.
Affordability was the big key, and one of the pundits, I guess, pretty much dubbed before she even started speaking, this was going to be the housing budget. January report from the Bank of Nova Scotia found that of the G7 countries, Canada has the lowest supply of homes on a population-adjusted basis, especially in Alberta, Manitoba, and guess what? Yes, Ontario. So that was going to be a major part of this. There's been a lot of feedback about what they have offered here, some incentive programs, some tax-free savings programs, which I guess attempts, John, to address the problem of affordability. But have they done a whole lot about supply here? Because what I hear from everyone is it's that just there aren't enough homes, and there's bidding wars going on, and that's the stumbling block right now.
Well, the accelerator program that they announced is $4 billion over 5 years, so that's $800 million a year. If it was going directly to just simply housing, in a city like Hamilton, where the average house price is now they tell us $1 million, that would get you 800 houses. Now, the money is not going to be directly spent on houses. It's going to go to a whole bunch of things. And actually, I was talking to Chad Collins yesterday, who's on a committee that is going to figure out. They've got the number. It's the $4 billion. Now they're going to figure out how to spend it. But some of it, to be honest, is going to go to things like there's a lot of smaller municipalities in Canada that don't have electronic filing for building permits. Hamilton does, but there's a lot of communities that don't. So some of the money is going to go towards speeding up the ability of municipalities to approve housing projects. And, I think a lot of people would look at that and kind of askance, but, and it'll go to other aspects of housing, but it's $800 million a year, and it's going to be sprinkled over several projects. That's the reality of it. So is it a game changer? Probably not, but it's a help. Back to the tax-free housing down payment plan, it's capped at $40,000. So 15 years ago, if you had $40,000, you could make a down payment on a decent house, but $40,000 doesn't even get you through the door now. So, again, it helps a bit, but any young couple that's buying a house now are probably relying heavily on equity that their parents have.
But that's the problem. I mean, even if this program works, I think in theory it makes all kinds of sense to do this. But, if all of a sudden, okay, these people accrue their $40,000 and say, okay, we want to hit the market. If there isn't an increase in supply, then there's going to be bidding wars on the existing properties, which is going to drive prices up even higher. Now, and what the minister didn't say yesterday, and I think it's going to be a key part of this discussion, the private sector is going to have to be part of this, and they didn't talk about that. I mean, how do you incentivize people to start building these things, and where are we going to build them? And that's a local decision. That's nothing the federal government can do anything about.
Well, I posted a story yesterday. There was a long debate, about an hour and a half debate at Hamilton City Council about the whole issue of building affordable housing along the LRT route. And that, coupled with some questions I sent to the two senior governments earlier in the year, there is no coordination. In this budget, there's talk of coordination between the three levels. The province needs to be part of this as well. But it's quite clear that, when Catherine McKenna came to announce the LRT funding, and she was very solemn saying, there's going to be conditions and one of them is going to be affordable housing. When she said that, there was nothing going on. And in the ensuing year, there has been no discussion whatsoever about affordable housing along the LRT route. So there's a lot of work to be done just getting everybody's act together. My sense is that that's probably going to have to start at the municipal level, creating pressure upward to the two senior governments to try to get some kind of coordinated activity, which will involve spending money. It'll involve changing the planning process. And a lot of people aren't going to like the changes to the planning process because they typically are going to involve a whole lot of tall buildings all over this city.
Yeah, and that's going to be a key element to this, and it's a key element of the debate round. Not everybody wants to live in a high-rise. Not everybody wants to live in the inner city. The people are going to have to make some pretty tough choices here. It's not really going to be the way it was in the past. And simply affordability is going to be a key thing. But there's got to be some coordination between the provinces and the municipal governments. I still think part of the blockage here is at the municipal level. And it's all well and good to say, okay, we're going to digitize this, et cetera, and we're going to give them a chance to update their records. But ultimately, it's town councils and city councils that are going to make decisions as to where this is going to go and how long it's going to go, or whether or not there's going to be everybody chasing down to the tribunal right now because they can't agree on anything.
Well, and that is a problem at the municipal level. The municipal politician bears the brunt of the anger. We do criticize them for sometimes deliberately not moving on something, knowing that it's going to go to the tribunal and knowing that it's going to get settled in favor of development. A prime example of that is the urban boundary here in Hamilton. Several councillors have told people that they knew full well that the freezing of the urban boundary was probably going to get overturned at the provincial level. And the minister, Steve Clark, and there was a letter to the editor today about Donna Skelly, who kind of raised it in a friendly question with Clark, where he said that definitely what Hamilton has decided about freezing the boundary is going to go to the tribunal. And so far, the tribunal has not disappointed the government too often.
Well, it's going to be an interesting debate. I got 30 seconds left. I just got to ask you, most people that are listening and were watching the budget, if in fact they did, don't much care about, debt to GDP ratios or even the big numbers about deficits and this sort of thing. How is it impacting me? What is my family better off? There's the dental care program. There's this incentive now so young families can get started. Did they check that box off?
I didn't see a lot of those kind of goodies. It's not like it was at the beginning of the pandemic where people were getting money that didn't even need it. I didn't see a ton of that, Bill. Again, going back to Freeland, even though she's part of a government that's pretty much indistinguishable from an NDP government, there seemed to be a little bit of restraint on her part, and that I found that quite interesting. I think the dental program is probably the only sort of, really outstanding kind of social program that was introduced. And, and of course, Jagmeet Singh is taking credit for that. And I suspect that some of that was negotiated before he made the demand, but
Yeah.
there you go. I thought, to take us from a $300 million deficit to 140 with, now the graph looks good. Let's see what happens, but to take it down to almost nothing by 2027, it looks good.
John Best from the Bay Observer. John, as always, thanks so much for the analysis. Take care. We'll talk again soon.
My pleasure, Bill.